30 years ago, you were the attaché for former Chinese ambassador Chai Zemin when the diplomatic relationship was to be established pretty soon during the Carter administration. But to my knowledge, it was very difficult, in fact, for the two sides to reach consensus over the issue of Taiwan. Could you tell us briefly to what degree had you been involved in the tough negotiations before the final establishment?
I went to the United States in December 1978. And before that, I worked in the translation office of the Foreign Ministry. I worked as an interpreter for some of the negotiations. Most of the negotiations were interpreted by Madam Si Yanhua. And I remember the negotiations were difficult because the issue of Taiwan was a very thorny issue. Mm-hmm. And although the Carter administration decided to accept the three conditions, that is the severance of diplomatic ties with Taiwan, withdrawal of U.S. troops in Taiwan, and abrogation of the Joint Defense Pact between the United States and Japan and Taiwan. There was one issue which was not resolved during the negotiations. That was the sale of weapons to Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Carter administration claimed that they could not agree to stop the sale completely. They could only agree to accept 1 year moratorium. And then, of course, the Chinese side decided that we should go ahead with the normalization, and the issue of sale of weapons to Taiwan should be resolved later on between the two sides.
And in fact, this issue was deliberated in the early 1970s when Richard Nixon first visited the People's Republic of China, and Dr. Henry Kissinger had very intense negotiations with the late Premier Zhou Enlai. I wonder why both sides made such slow progress between 1972, when Richard Nixon came over, and the formal and final establishment of the bilateral relationship on January the 1st, 1979.
I think the difficulty is that they wanted to maintain some level of relations with Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And that's something we could not accept. And finally, the administration agreed that they would sever their relations with Taiwan, official relations with Taiwan, completely. They would only maintain unofficial economic and cultural ties with Taiwan. So that's how we got the normalization sort of accepted.
But Taiwan only remains the most sensitive and most important issue in the general framework of the bilateral relationship between these two great nations.
Right.
What are the other most important and pressing issues for the two governments to tackle? What have been those major challenges over the past 3 decades? Because we are supposed to review 3 decades of mm-hmm. this very important bilateral relationship.
Mm. And trade issue, of course, was sometimes was a problem which we need to take care of. There were trade frictions, and we export lots of consumer goods to the United States, and so the United States had a very large deficit in their trade with us, and so they wanted to fix this trade deficit. They wanted us to import more from the United States. Actually, we are buying a lot of things from the United States, and the reason why we can't buy still more is because there's been export control. And the
other on the high-tech related
on the high-tech related products, that's true. And of course, the other thing they are complaining about is the exchange rate of mm-hmm. RMB. And we have made it clear that for our own sake, we need to start the reform with regard to the exchange rate of RMB. But the reform has to progress according to our 3 principles. The 3 principles which were laid out by Premier Wen Jiabao. So in the past, I think we have made quite some progress as far as the trade negotiations. We have set up a number of mechanisms, such as the JCCT, Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, and such as the Strategic Economic Dialogue. So with the help of these mechanisms, I think we have done a good job in resolving some of the differences in terms of trade between China and the United States. And one other issue, that is, there are people in the United States in the past who tried to politicize the trade issue. For instance, the so-called MFN, that is most nation status, most favored
During
nation.
the Clinton administration.
Right. Most favored nation status. That became a issue at that time.
But President Clinton was able to separate the two issues.
Right. But after he came into office, he tried to tie the most favored nation status to human rights. They wanted us to accept some of the terms in terms of the human rights situation in China. Later on, he agreed to delink. So that's what happened later on. So in those years, the MFN would be put to a vote in the Congress, year in and year out. But later on, this issue went away. And in recent years, there are people, particularly in the Congress, who try to politicize the trade issue, turning them into a political issue in our relations.
Don't you think the White House would prefer to play the good guy and the White House the bad guy, so that we are held hostage by their way of exercising their influence? For example, Taiwan is also used as a card, more or less, not only to the benefit of the Pentagon military complex, but for those who just want to use Taiwan to to sort of blackmail the PRC. This is at least the feeling of a lot of the ordinary Chinese here. What would you say about our perception?
Yeah, I think it depends on the issue. People should understand that the United States is a country where there are a number of centers. White House is a center, and of course the Congress is also a center. So this is a reality. That is to say, the Congress and the White House sometimes do not agree with one another.
In this situation, whom should we talk to? Were we barking at the wrong tree sometimes? Because, as you said, there are still many centers of policy making in the States. Whom should we talk to?
I think we should talk to all of them.
That's why you want to have one-on-one conferences with the lawmakers.
Right. I think it's very important for people in the United States, no matter it is the White House or the Congress. It's very important for them to understand why we are so concerned about this issue.
Ambassador Zhou, for decades, Taiwan has been able to do very strong lobby. Outside the Capitol Hill. Don't you think we should do much the same? Because lobbying is viewed as legitimate in the center of politics in the D.C. Do you think we could be allowed by the politicians in the U.S. to also pay the PR company and to help erect a good image about the PRC instead of being demonized from time to time in one China bashing campaign after another?
Let me put it this way. Lobbying firms can help you to set up meetings. They can help you to set up meetings. They would help you to have a better access to some of the members. Without their help, it will be difficult for you to get a meeting with these members. But at the level of substance, there is very little they can do.
By January the 20th, the Bush administration will leave the White House. And the President-elect, Mr. Obama, will take office. Perhaps it's a little bit too early to review the 8-year U.S.-China relationship since President Bush took office. But what do you think is the most important legacy of his administration when it comes to this bilateral relationship with the PRC?
They came into office with a different sort of position. That is to say, China was regarded as a strategic competitor. That's before he came into office, during the campaign, and shortly after he came into office. So that was the position. But later on, they gradually changed that perspective. Gradually, they saw China as a partner, as a friend. So that's a change. And I think during the later part of his presidency, they agreed that China should be viewed as a stakeholder